Welcome to We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard, and today we're looking at The Few and Cursed, which is provided to us from Rock Manor Games, designed by Mike Nade, and it's based on the popular comic book series, which was by Felipe Cano and Fabiano Neves. The world where The Few and Cursed is based is a barren wasteland where water has essentially got the last bus home, never to come back again. And you, as a curse chaser, are roaming the land, proving your mettle and proving your grit as you take down monsters, complete jobs, take down the most wanted in the area, and hunt down artifacts from secret locations. Well, they're not secret because they're on the board, like in the corners. There's big letters there as well. I mean, that was just a lie, let's be honest. Not true at all. But anyway, look, I'm a fan of deck building games. I've played a terribly large amount of Star Realms and probably been beaten just as much as Star Realms. A deck builder, in its essence, is essentially you have a deck of cards, and as you play a game, the cards will be added to your hand, which will increase and improve your powers, your abilities, and you'll be continuing to build your deck to a point where you're playing cards which you'll dominate and defeat the opposition. And that's at the very basis as like a kind of a deck builder. They come in kind of like various flavours all the way up the spectrum. Your purity of, say, like your Star Realms, which is just you're playing cards and buying cards to win, all the way through to kind of like you're starting to get into your Clanks and Tyrants of the Underdark, and even The Few and Cursed kind of sits at the kind of the heavier end of the deck building kind of spectrum, I would say, in the fact that yes, deck building is the core thing underpinning it. However, in the grand scheme of things, the deck building itself is a kind of a relatively small chunk of the overall game. Basically, the way the turn works is that as your character, you will be moving from space to space, but you'll need to be, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to kind of draw a couple of cards, select one which you think is going to be suitable for you, add it to your hand, therefore kind of increasing the hand that you have and potentially giving you some options. As you're moving around the various areas, they all require some kind of cost. Now, whether that's kind of like a movement cost, or whether it's or whether it's kind of be an attack kind of cost. In some cases, you're going to have like a curse cost as well, which can have an overall effect on your kind of character. You'll have the ability to, as you're out and about, you'll have the ability to capture kind of people who are on a wanted list, and that will give you kind of additional grit, and in some cases force you to take kind of additional actions if you do defeat them. And that's in the wanted section. On the most wanted section, you've generally got much tougher kind of characters that you're usually going to be taking on later on into the game as you go. And as you work your way through the decks, you'll eventually get down to the kind of the bottom kind of monster characters, which will spawn these kind of delicious looking kind of miniatures onto the board. Your idea is you're wanting to basically defeat them, or three of them, in order to win the game, and that's one point. The other thing is you can also collect artifacts from locations at the corners of the board as well, and that is also a kind of a game ending situation. The other way the game will end is if any of these monsters manage to make their way into the center of the board, San Andreas, and they'll kind of wreck it, and that will end the game too. There's a lot of game here. There's the board itself there's always choice. You're never going to come to this. One of the things I've always sometimes seen from deck builders is sometimes what you're playing is like a damage limitation exercise, that you've not had the cards that you wanted, and therefore you're kind of doing the thing which is going to least harm your kind of situation. And that's just the nature of deck builders, because you're dealing with, a kind of a random deck. With the few and cursed, you've got an option to do so many things just because of the way that the game kind of works. Even after you draw your cards, you're then heading in to kind of like an encounter. So it's almost like it's like a kind of a choose your own adventure. You'll pick based on your area. You're going to be kind of like you're picking up these cards, and it'll ask you what you want to do, and based on that, you're going to get a reward, or you're going to get kind of like a curse. You actually also have cursed areas as well on the board, and that gives you a kind of a worst case kind of scenario in terms of how the encounter cards kind of work. On the other side of it, as you're roaming the land, you'll be using up kind of either movement points, so you're going to be using up your strength points, but you're also going to have to bear in mind when you're trying to take down some of the people who are on the wanted list, and especially those that are on the most wanted list. But it's okay, because you've got the option to head yourself back into San Andreas, where you've got the option to kind of take some jobs, and jobs will give you water, which is your currency of the game. They're a bit dry, not really that watery, to be honest. Something that Mike needs to work on. Or go to the shop and either upgrade your stats that you have, or purchase some items which are going to help you on your way. As I was saying, the deck building is just a bit of an underpinning of the whole thing. You have a player board, and your player board will give you kind of like your life points, the number of bullets that you carry, and also your curse value as well. Your curse value is an interesting mechanic in the game, in that as you play the game and as you play kind of certain cards, especially as you break into the actual deck itself, playing certain cards which will give you an advantage will potentially also increase the level of curse that you have. Once you reach a certain level of curse, then your character card that you have is double-sided, and it will flip to the other side, which potentially gives you advantages while you are cursed, but also gives you some very direct and distinct disadvantages as well. Your idea within this is you potentially want to be managing where your curse is going to be. Some cards will allow you to reduce your curse. It's not a good idea to be cursed for very kind of long, otherwise that can have a serious detrimental effect on the game and basically allowing you to even win. As the game goes on and you're getting through your most wanted cards, you start to kind of spawn your monsters, which you kind of want to do, because one of the ways to win the game is you want to have at least 3 monsters kind of defeated. But you're kind of building things up as you go. You start off with kind of like your small jobs that you have, which they're just taking on kind of certain tasks. It could be kind of like defeating somebody. It's all based on kind of resources. The wanted list, that's kind of like your bread and butter. You can continually be kind of using your resources in order to kind of beat one of the wanted characters. And an interesting twist, as soon as you beat a wanted character, then the card will flip over and you get the other side of the card, which will either be more difficult or slightly easier, or give kind of different rewards. Once you get to down the deck and you get to your monsters and your most wanted characters, you will have hopefully been to the store, so you've got some additional equipment that you can use. You will have hopefully been through quite a few improvisation rounds, so you've got a healthy kind of deck. And so it is the normal kind of deck building kind of tsunami that you get, where you look at the beginning, you go, oof, don't know how I'm going to be doing that. And you'll get to the point where you're kind of like, well, actually, I'm just going to go for it, because I can definitely know that I can easily take on kind of like some of these characters. You look at some of these guys here, and you've got to have some size of power in order to defeat them. But when you have a couple of revolvers in your hand, when you've got a couple of extra bits of equipment, when you've got a couple of decent cards in your deck, it's going to be pretty straightforward. As for what I think, it's hats off to the presentation. It looks lovely. I mean, there's a lot of work that's gone into the theme here. This is somebody who, for all intents and purposes, you can tell that they love the source material. I mean, this is pretty much, I would say, it's probably a love letter to the comic series. Mike obviously really likes The Few and Cursed, because this could have all been a lot smaller. This takes up an awful lot of table, to the point where, if I actually put my, the game board where it's meant to be and all the cards out, it's going to take up and you have like a couple of players here, this is going to be a pretty big kind of table hogger. But then everything in it is, I'm a big fan, and I've said this a couple of times, I'm a big fan of good art. I'm a big appreciator of somebody who's obviously taken the time with the graphics of their game, and really kind of looked into it, and not just done a kind of a copy kind of paste job. The cards themselves, the backs of the cards are marvelous. They do look like a traditional kind of back of the playing cards. The artwork contained within the actual cards themselves are lifted straight from the comic book, but obviously fantastic and sublime. The minis themselves, I mean, that's an imposing beast to have on your table. The player boards look fantastic. There's a lot of love here. There's a lot of appreciation here for the source material, and I kind of like that. I like that a lot. On the flip side, is it too much? Is it a bit overproduced? Could it be slightly smaller? Could it be more practical? I mean, even with this size of board, okay, there's not like an allocated space to put kind of like the artifacts. So to me, that's a misstep. There's not a space to kind of put the main deck. Again, it seems like a little bit of a misstep here. But once you get it to the table, once you play it for a bit, again, because it's fundamentals, it's a deck builder, there's not an awful lot of complication here. The rulebook is very easy to understand. Massive kind of illustrations in here in terms of like helping people kind of understand how to play the game. Ironically, there's not the actual setup of the board, the information on how you set up the game could be slightly better. I really would have appreciated an actual overhead view of the board, but that's just being kind of nitpicky. It managed to get set up, it managed to kind of get it played. Is it worthwhile your time? if you're a deck builder fan, if you know Star Realms is something that you like, and you like the kind of the mitigating your luck, if you're into your deck builders, your Tyrants of the Underdark and such like, then if you're looking for something which is a very much a Western theme, then I think you would probably get a kind of a lot out of it. For people who maybe space is a concern, it's going to take up an awful lot of space, but that, you know, your mileage may vary. The miniatures are fantastic. The card art is really, really good. The mechanics themselves, the curse mechanic, I really like the curse mechanic and having to manage that. I like the fact that as you go and as you build, your tableau kind of builds out with kind of jobs that you've done and equipment that you have. So it's kind of, I kind of like that. It's not as complicated as it looks. It's probably about maybe a 15 to 20 minute kind of learn time, and then you'll grasp it. The way the rulebook's laid out, it might be actually worthwhile kind of playing that first round just to kind of get a grip of it. But once you do, it's kind of fairly straightforward. Yeah, so I'm interested to see how this plays with maybe with more players, maybe 3 or 4 players. It certainly does. It's really funny because if you're playing it even like solo and kind of 2-player accounts, the solo player count, it isn't horrifically different from the from multiplayer, because you are still trying to kind of do the same thing and reach the same objectives. So if you are interested in kind of treating yourself to a pretty big kind of solo player game, then yeah, worthwhile kind of looking at. So from an art point of view, presentation point of view, fantastic. From a gameplay point of view, if you like your deck builders, yeah, it's certainly worthwhile considering. There's some size of a box. There's a hell of a lot of stuff in here as well, and the presentation is brilliant. So that's The Few and Cursed from Rock Manor Games. My name's Richard. We're Not Wizards. Thank you very much for watching. If you have played The Few and Cursed, and if you're a backer of the game because it was on Kickstarter, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on it. Or if you're a fan of deck builders, tell us in the comments below what your favourite deck builders are. But until the next time, stay safe, roll, there's no dice. Rubbish game. Make something awful. But until the next time, y'all come back now, you hear? Yeehaw!